Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gary Segura. I'm a professor of public policy at the University of California, Los Angeles. And I've had the privilege for the last year to co-chair the LA Governance Reform Project, a research-based endeavor staffed by faculty from across the region's institutions to explore how we might answer the question, how could LA governance be better? With that as a way of background, I want to draw your attention to the chat where links to our funders are going to be present. And over the course of this webinar, links to our website and to other resources will become available in that chat. I had the privilege of co-chairing this with Ange-Marie Hancock, originally of USC and now of The Ohio State University. And the two of us benefited from the incredible generous support of the philanthropic community in town, and most especially the coordinating and fiscal sponsorship of the California Community Foundation. What you see now in front of you is the leadership team, which was Ange-Marie and I, as well as 4 other faculty members drawn from institutions across the city and county. Dr. Rafe Sonnenschein, originally of Cal State LA, and today the president of the Haynes Foundation, or I'm sorry, the executive director of the Haynes Foundation. Sarah Sadwani from Pomona College, Boris Ricks from Cal State Northridge, and Fernando Guerra from Loyola Marymount. We had the benefit of a tremendous staff of research support. They included most directly Francisco Jasso, Dr. Francisco Jasso of the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA, and Professor Tim Krebs of the University of New Mexico, a noted expert on local governance. Faculty members and research staff and research assistants from all of the institutions represented in the leadership team were involved in producing the background research and information necessary to build these recommendations. Again, I'm going to emphasize that we proceeded in this question as researchers and as scholars, not as advocates for a particular position. Next slide, please. So our final recommendations are today. We plan to accompany this event with a variety of press availabilities, a process that is already underway. We have coordinated with partners at Common Cause and RLA Coalition to provide as much momentum as possible to try to push some of these reform ideas across the finish line. And both of those organizations will be represented with us today. Our recommendations will include expanding the council and expanding the school board. Please mute, if you're online, please mute your sound. Expanding the council and expanding the school board, establishing an independent redistricting commission for each of the institutions, and implement a package of rigorous ethics reforms to hold elected officials more accountable. Whoever is managing our audio, can you please mute all participants? Thank you. Next slide, please. I want to say a bit about the research we contracted for. So with the support of philanthropy, we entered into a contract with Ebony Marketing Systems to conduct 12 focus groups across the city of Los Angeles of LA voters, grouped by race and ethnicity, as well as by gender and sexual expression. The focus group informants represented every corner of Los Angeles, including all 15 council districts, and spanned socioeconomic and occupational diversity. 56% had lived in Los Angeles for 21 years or more, 44% 20 years or less. We also did a probability sample poll of Los Angeles registered voters. This poll was implemented by Interviewing Services of America, headquartered in Thousand Oaks, to conduct a poll of 1,624 registered voters, representative of the diversity of Los Angeles. The poll was conducted in English and Spanish by a mixture of online and telephone sampling. Raw data were subject to post-stratification weights to match known population characteristics of the voting population of Los Angeles, and the margin of error on the poll results is plus or minus 2.43%. Our first primary recommendation is with respect to independent redistricting. Establish 2 independent commissions, one for the city of Los Angeles and one for the LA Unified School District. Some of you on the call may not realize, but the governance of the school district is written into the Los Angeles City Charter. The commissioners would be selected in a multi-stage process that screens the applicants for the positions for eligibility, randomly selects among the screened group, and then tasks the first half of the commission, which will be selected in the first round, with completing the representation of the city or the school district in filling out the remaining seats. This is a process not entirely dissimilar to the one used by the State Redistricting Commission. We would impose a 3-year residency requirement in Los Angeles or the LAUSD catchment, depending on which commission. There would be disclosure requirements for political donations and clear transparency rules. We want as broad a pool as possible for application, essentially all adult residents of the city or the school district catchment of Los Angeles. We would establish a calendar for decennial implementation. Importantly, and I'm happy to talk more about this, we propose intermediate implementation to redraw districts in advance of the 2028 election. Some of us would love to have it done in advance of the 2026 election, but we were mindful of the logistical difficulties of implementing something adopted on the 2024 ballot in time to have districts redrawn for qualifying early in 2026. It just seemed impractical, but we can sure have new districts up and running for the 2028 municipal elections. Establishing an independent redistricting commission for each of those two bodies is broadly supported in our data. When we asked survey respondents, are district lines better drawn by officials who run for election or by a neutral agency? 76% of the registered voters in our survey prefer a neutral party. When we asked if it was on the ballot today, if they would vote for an IRC for the city council, 75% said yes. To vote for an IRC for the LA Unified School District, 76% said yes. In our focus groups across race and ethnicity, we had broad support for an independent approach to make the process clearer and fairer. Angelenos envisioned the participation of commissioners representing all aspects of the community. They also noted that appointment is not the sole option. Several groups discussed electing commissioners. We did not propose that in our final proposal. We would increase, reducing the size of council districts is our second principal recommendation. We would increase the size of the city council to 25 seats. 20 of those would be single member districts to reduce the ratio of population to representative. And in our current structure with 15 regional districts or 15 local districts, there are more than 260,000 souls resident in every LA City Council district. This certainly stretches the boundaries of what we would call local government. We would, in addition, add 5 regional members, each regional district nesting 4 of the regular single member districts under them. This regional set of seats provides 2 points of contact with the council for every person in Los Angeles. And by having each locale in the city represented by more than 1 member, this reduces, whether by practice or by rule, the current approach, a veto approach to land use, in which individual members of the city council are essentially czars over the approval of development projects in their district. That has troublesome implications, and by moving to a circumstance where 2 members of the council could broadly speak to the needs of the local area, we do away with the justification for this sort of veto authority. We are concerned about cost, and we think the voters will be too. Possible ways to cut cost in expansion exist on focusing on the overall council budget and holding a cap on the total number of council expenditures. We propose to cap expenditures in the council to reassure skeptical voters. We engage in a budgetary analysis of major cities around the country and in the state of California. Our budgetary analysis makes clear that even an expanded council would cost less than 0.5% of the city budget. LA's expenditures would be less than or comparable to other cities. 85% of the voters in our poll said that cost was an important factor. 65% of the voters reported that they were somewhat or much more likely to support the expansion of the council if we could include the cap at on the cost at 1%. We can do it at half that. Enlarging the council is viewed quite favorably in our poll. 76% support enlargement to 21 seats, and of that 76, 87% of those would go on to enlarge to 25, or that would be about 66% of the citywide electorate. That is very strong, given that expansion is somewhat difficult to do, even though we think it is extraordinarily well justified, in part because the city council is held in such low regard. If you're unhappy with elected officials, why make more? Well, the answer is you make more to increase the responsiveness and the transparency. The focus groups thought a closer connection between Angelino and representative was a good idea. And some groups suggested that one possible outcome would be a more diverse council. Their chief concerns were costs, which I mentioned a moment ago, and the trustworthiness of council members, which is a pre-existing condition in the world of healthcare reform. We propose comparable reforms for the LA Unified School District. We would enlarge the LAUSD board from 7 seats to 11 seats. 71% of our respondents supported that enlargement. We would have a comparable independent redistricting commission process, as you already know, to draw school board lines, and 76% of voters reported supporting an IRC for the LA Unified School District Board. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Ange-Marie Hancock from The Ohio State University, who will finish talking about our recommendations and take us through the end of the process.
Thank you very much, Gary. It has been an honor to serve with you and to serve with the rest of the leadership team, as well as the researchers on this project. I'm going to talk about the ethics reform recommendations that we made. For those of you who have reviewed our preliminary report that was released in June, you will note that our prior preliminary recommendations are now final. So we have the Ethics Commission authority. We are recommending that commission approval of city council ethics legislation be implemented, as well as empowering the Ethics Commission to place policy recommendations directly on the ballot. And it's important to note that all of these final recommendations that we are making, including these two, we are recommending be part of change in the charter and not by ordinance, to again further implement and cement them in terms of the change that needs to happen in Los Angeles. Next slide, please. Additional final recommendations came out of additional study that we were able to conduct, both the poll and the focus groups that Gary referenced a little bit earlier, as well as interviews that were conducted by members of the leadership team, as well as a research informational brief that was written by Dr. Francisco Jasso. And so in terms of commission size, LAGRP is recommending that the commission should increase in size by 2 commissioners to 7 instead of 5. And each of those commissioners would be appointed respectively by the mayor and the city council president. The other thing that we wanted to make sure we talked about when we talked about size or constitution of the commission is that the Ethics Commission membership, so commissioners, should actually also be subject to the same selection criteria as IRC members. Currently, there is no hard and fast set of criteria, aside from the very minimal criteria that apply to all commission appointments, such as residency in Los Angeles. And so again, we think that when we're talking about an ethics commission that's going to have additional responsibilities, that we should actually want to make sure we're going through a thorough vetting process as those appointments are taking place. In terms of commission staff, the LAGRP recommends that the commission should have the power and resources to hire independent legal counsel. And so again, thinking about the fact that so many Angelinos do not trust what's going on in their municipal government at this point, we wanted to make sure that not just in cases where there might be a conflict of interest for the city attorney's office, but more generally, when the Ethics Commission sees that they need to have some independent legal advice, that there are not strictures or other parts of the government that are trying to restrict them from getting that independent legal counsel. In terms of budget protection, we recognize that there may be additional responsibilities for the commission, and LAGRP recommends that the commission's budget should be protected from mid-period revision or abrupt year-to-year reduction. And again, the idea here is that should the commission do something that the city council disagrees with or would prefer not to have happen, we don't want retaliation or other kinds of things occurring to the commission that prevents them from carrying out the work that they are charged with doing. In a similar vein, we recommend that the commission should be protected from receiving unfunded mandates that again would hamper the effectiveness of actually enforcing the ethics regulations that they are required to do. In terms of rules and regulations, for the Ethics Commission, we agree and want to endorse that the Commission should be authorized to place policy recommendations by a supermajority vote. So again, if you're thinking about that enhanced 7 members, it would take a 5 of 7 member vote. And they would be able to actually place things directly on the ballot for consideration by the voters as a voter approved ordinance. Typically, the process now requires the city council to place things on the ballot. And we would say for ethics reforms in particular, or ethics changes in particular, the city council is an interested party. And so we would recommend that the Ethics Commission have the option, not required, but have the option to place policy recommendations directly on the ballot in their judgment. Next slide, please. Like the other 2 bits of recommendations that Gary discussed, ethics reform is also widely supported based on our empirical research. From the survey, we found that 8 in 10 voters surveyed say that the level of corruption in the Los Angeles City Council should at least raise concern and/or is more than most government bodies. In addition, approximately 9 in 10 voters, or 89%, of voters surveyed in our poll believe ethics rules should be made stronger, either a little bit stronger, and that's 42%, or much stronger, and that's 47% for a total of 89%. In addition, focus groups also thought ethics reform was necessary. Their emphasis, however, was on enhanced enforcement of the council's code of ethics as a primary mechanism for reform. So overall, the idea here is that ethics reform is widely supported by all of the Angelenos that we talked to for the most part. And we would recommend that ethics reform be an essential component. It is not something that can be jettisoned or something that can be done separately and out of conversation with the Independent Redistricting Commission, as well as the conversation about council size and reducing the size of council districts to provide better representation. Next slide, please. I'd like to thank you all for listening to the presentation piece of this presentation, and we welcome your comments. I also want to just share, as we think about this, we think that the work that we have done, 18 research briefs, a citywide poll, 12 focus groups, numerous interviews, and conversations across the civic landscape can work in many jurisdictions. While the findings will not be identical across jurisdictions, the approach is absolutely something that we can think about given what's happening in states like New York, North Carolina, and indeed what's coming up here in Ohio. I'd like to turn it over now at this point to Dr. Rafe Sonnenschein of the Haynes Foundation and late of Cal State LA, who will be moderating our panel. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Andre, and thank you, Gary, for your leadership and consistent, really great work on this project, keeping our group together moving forward. A big feature of our work has been partnership with 2 very important organizations in town, Common Cause and Our LA. And just to emphasize this, the partnership of equals in that none of us dictated to each other what conclusions we would reach, but we've stayed in very close contact. And we're just thrilled to have them both represented right now to discuss with us these recommendations, but also their own thoughts. So let me introduce Aaron Robertson, who is the Director of Political Voice for Catalyst, one of the most important advocacy organizations in Los Angeles, and a key leader in the coalition known as Our LA. Welcome, Aaron. Are you muted by any chance?
Thank you, Rafe. Excited to be here.
Okay, great. And also Russia Chavez Cardenas is the Voting Rights and Redistricting Program Manager with California Common Cause. More than 15 years of experience in public policy and advocacy, including in healthcare and many other areas. These 2 folks bring a lot of experience and their organizations to the table. Russia, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So Aaron, I'm going to start with you because we tend to believe that polls are magical and any single poll, but really they're all just different ways to dip into the community. And I wondered if you could do two things for us. Tell everybody what Our LA is, but also what did you do to hear from the community and what have you heard that kind of amplifies, is similar to or different from what we found?
Thanks, Rafe. Yes, RLA is a group of 12 community-based organizations, primarily representing Angelitos, largely underrepresented across the city, both in terms of geographic and racial and ethnic communities. We formed shortly after the leaked audio as a desire to come together and address what we saw as challenges within governance of both representation and acting on the needs of all Angelinos. Throughout our process of the last year, we've been reaching out to residents up and down Los Angeles to hear their thoughts on city council, city government, as well as the reforms currently under consideration. This process has had all 12 of our members reaching out to the communities that they work in and organize, a set of 13 different convenings, 11 of which were in person, all across the city to bring in voices, first to inform recommendations and second to ratify them, to bring them to council. And then a process of surveying thousands of Angelinos, many of which were at the convenings on their priorities. And we found a number of things in this process, one of which people do not feel represented by the council, whether that's their identity being reflected, their interests being represented, or their needs being addressed. All scored very low marks within both the survey and in conversations in the convenings. This is across the board, but especially amongst communities of color, and particularly amongst Black communities, where 59% of Black residents say that the council addresses their needs, not at all or only a little. We also found that Angelinos believe that an independent redistricting commission could make a difference. 65% of folks that we engaged said they strongly supported it, and only 12% said they opposed it. They also believe it will improve problems with representation. Additionally, they supported expanding the city council, and were hopeful that expansion of the city council could lead to improvements in representation, where we had 58% of all the folks that we engaged supporting it and 25% opposed. Finally, we found that overwhelmingly residents in Los Angeles lack trust within the city and want to see change and reform to address the problems.
Great. Well, thank you, Aaron. And that's why it's really good to have more than one group surveying the public. We get overlapping but interesting results. Russia, let me ask you about the odds of reform actually succeeding. You've had a lot of experience with this. Common Cause has been in this game for decades, and so have you for a very long time as well. Is this a political window that we're in right now for reform? And, you know, the council has put forward redistricting, independent redistricting. If there is sentiment for more of a three-part plan of council expansion and ethics reform, what do you see as the path to reform actually happening? And how long will this window be open, do you think?
I think that's a strong yes. I think we have a very strong political window right now. And I think when we continue to have a coordinated effort with, you know, folks like you all doing academic research, us having been in this space doing democracy reform work since our inception as an organization, and the grassroots organizations and the grassroots groups who are on the ground, who I feel like have helped lead a lot of this effort forward, continuing to have that conversation in front of local and ethnic media and at the city council level. There is this political window we have right now to push it forward. We have seen successes like this in other areas, like you guys are thinking about ethics reforms and charter reforms. Like we've seen this come up in Long Beach, where we've successfully had charter reform commissions. We're seeing this in Oakland, where they've also had successful charter reform commissions. And all of this is happening on the heels of other things. We have the state redistricting commission. We also have the heels of the Fair Maps Act. So there's a lot of other peripheral, like democracy reform initiatives that are happening at the state level and at the local level. And what we're seeing here in LA appears to be like a hybrid and like a fever pitch of that. And so if this all continues to go, I think we can start to see some reforms in the city. We just have to keep pressing on.
Aaron, what do you see as the role of the community and the role of the city council in moving forward? Now, you know, the city council has had an ad hoc committee on governance reform, which is really kind of unprecedented to have met for so long. But sometimes the community can need to push a little bit and the council has its own concerns to raise. What's the best way to guide and navigate reform through that thicket, do you think, from what you've seen?
So we're at an interesting point in this process. It is encouraging that the council has made a motion to put IRC on the ballot. That process isn't done. You know, we need to ensure that the language for the ballot reflects decisions that have been lifted up by the council and the recommendations that have come through all three of these groups. And frankly, the council has taken an approach of being fairly hands-off with how the commission will perform its duties. And there are other recommendations that we would like to see put into that, primarily to ensure that the eventual commission will be reflective of all Angelenos and can effectively engage all Angelenos. And many of those changes will need to be done through the admin code, as well as actual advocacy to the commission once it's formed. And so bringing community voice and expert perspective into how those happen will continue to be important. We are at a very different space with council expansion. The city council has taken a very thorough process to line by line go through the CLA's recommendations on an IRC, debate them, discuss them, put them forward. And that hasn't happened with expansion yet. The conversation has been much more limited, and we're still at a place of why and what is the benefit to expansion. And so pushing beyond that is going to require both pressure from communities on the ground, as well as folks in the media, advocacy groups, the recommendations of the LA Governance Reform Project, putting pressure and continuing to elevate this issue to maximize the political window that Russia was just talking about.
Great. Russia, and would you agree with what Aaron's saying, and how would you apply that to ethics reform also, do you think?
I agree wholeheartedly with what Aaron is saying. And how I think about it through ethics reform is what we saw with the ad hoc governance reform committees. We saw a strong leadership. We saw a concerted effort. We saw that line by line investment of the city council go through this process to move it forward. And at the end of November, we are seeing the same ad hoc committee take an action to advance a motion to review those best practices for charter reform, for a charter reform process, and to create a commission that would evaluate and provide some recommendations on charter reform for the future ballots and related matters. And so as we continue to think about that, we would want to find a way to have either a very similar process that was taken through the IRC, where there was line by line and the city council vetted that process, or something else like what you guys have recommended is possible here, where it goes to a charter reform commission. I think both of those options are doable. And I think the biggest points that we'd want to highlight on principle is that we want to ensure that those types of actions that are taken require for some sort of consideration by the city council, if it goes to a charter reform commission, that there's some sort of requirement or teeth, some follow-up that really requires the city council to consider these motions and to consider these reforms, and for there to be an opportunity for transparency and public engagement and input. And so there's a couple of ways of what that looks like. So in Oregon, the Charter Reform Commission can refer amendments to the ballot. And in other locations, like in San Francisco, Charter Reform Commission can, they can take this issue up by a supermajority. They can kind of leave it over to the legislative body. If the legislative body for some reason does nothing with those recommendations, the Charter Reform Commission can come back to themselves and say, by a supermajority vote, we want to put this forward to the ballot. And so there's some ways to continue to arrest the attention of elected officials by how we structure those reforms. And I think the one thing that we really want to see to make sure that goes forward is that arrested attention like we saw with the IRC.
Very, very interesting. Just to clarify, by the way, our group has not made a recommendation for or against a charter reform commission, which is why I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about that. We've had our focus on using the time between now and June, when is really a kind of a real deadline for getting things on the November ballot. What is your take, Aaron, on this, the charter commission discussion that's out there?
There's a couple components to this. I think one would lift up, again, the sort of political window that we're in. And there's some fear and skepticism that a charter commission could be a way to delay reform till we're outside of that window. The council president at a recent ad hoc committee meeting really lifted up that he sees a charter commission as part of a two-step solution to governance reform in LA. And that's something that we would strongly agree with. In terms of ethics reform and IRC council expansion, those are things that are being discussed, being debated, should go to the ballot and allow voters to have a say on those. However, those three reforms are not a silver bullet to address governance and representation within Los Angeles. They help us take considerable steps forwards, but there are many other issues within the charter that could be tackled. And creating a charter commission, particularly in some of the ways Russia is lifting up, that take a holistic look at the way our city functions, what is built into the charter, how do we change and address that, could be a really positive solution to help round out and complement what is being done currently through the ad hoc governance reform committee process.
So, Russia, what do you think is the value of getting these three things on the November 24 ballot? I'm going to ask you both that question. What's the urgency of that in your mind?
Fundamentally, I think what we want to see is true representation of individuals who live within the city. And so, you know, civic engagement of those communities is not going to happen in a vacuum. And if we want to really see the voices of those communities uplifted, and then we really want to see their participation happen, right? We've got to think about how we think about other governance reforms to build that trust, you know, and you guys are talking a lot about, we're talking about a lot about trust. And so if we pair, you know, IRCs and charter reform commissions and ethics reforms, we're going to start to round out how we think about increasing civic engagement fully, and then getting voters really to participate and thinking about how we're going to have representatives show up for communities on the ground level. And I think, you know, when we think about building those systems and trust and thinking about how our elected officials behave and how they're going to be held accountable, and how our democratic institutions are going to be structured to either, you know, gatekeep or call in communities that are historically disenfranchised communities, we want to think about those types of other democratic reforms to really push the needle on a comprehensive civic engagement level.
Okay. Aaron, let me ask you both a question, which is if they threw all three of our groups in a room and locked the door on council expansion, first of all, we'd make sure there was good food. I mean, we'd have a good time. It wouldn't be a terrible experience. We like each other. We'd have fun. And we're told we couldn't come out of the room until we had an agreement on an ideal council expansion model to present to the council or the community. But we each put our best foot forward for the discussion. We've put ours forward today. If you were putting yours, knowing that the three groups could probably really figure something out, that would be an ideal, what would our LA put forward? And then what would Common Cause put forward for that discussion?
Well, first of all, I think you identified almost everyone in Los Angeles that would actually enjoy being locked in this room to hash this out. So we're a unique group of folks.
Yes, we're geeks, yes.
It's actually quite remarkable that you have three different processes led by groups coming from different directions, you know, academics taking a research lens, like the premier advocacy and policy organization on democracy within California, and a group of CBOs going to residents, get their perspective on it, that actually ended in very similar spaces, in terms of what needs to happen within the city in terms of governments. As far as RLA goes, as we think about council expansion, we came up with a range in terms of our recommendations, 23 to 31, which fits squarely in both what Common Cause and what the LA Governance Reform Project has brought up. In trying to improve representation for Angelenos, we find that is the sweet spot where we're maximizing the number of districts to enable us to elect, to position communities to elect candidates of choice. And so, we are comfortable with anything in that range. I think the real question that comes up for us is some of the more ambitious things that have come through some of these processes. And so I know the LA Governance Reform Project has recommended not only 20 single member districts, but also 5 districts or 5 council members being represented through kind of regional, almost at large spaces across districts. And this really comes to the question of what is politically palatable to get through council and get through voters, and what is going to be best interest of representing Angelenos. And there are a lot of things that have been thrown up through our process, like multi-member districts, ranked choice voting, that could be strong complements to expanding the council, that I think is where we would really dig into how do we best serve Los Angeles.
And what do you think, Russia? Where would you, coming to this wonderful meeting? I think Aaron is right. I think we are the 3 among others. There's others on our call who would also love such a meeting. What would you bring to the table as your best option right now, and what would you be open to?
Yeah, as Aaron mentioned, we had a strong recommendation. We had a strong recommendation for increasing council size, and we were all very similar in the size and how do you get to increasing the size of the council to improve representation. I think that you guys are recommending that the hybrid pieces that you're recommending. And as you guys have noted, there's like very little research and a lot of we still have to do more study on how are these hybrid districts going to work? What would an at-large combined with district elections really look like? And what we want to ensure is that we study those, because there's concerns on the and that we've seen instances where these combined districts, they work really well. And they work really well for communities of color and to make sure that there's full representation. And then we've also seen instances where they don't work so well, and where the individuals who are elected at large are the individuals who can campaign dollar the most, and the people who have special interests, and the people who can have more influx of money to be able to get those seats because they're harder to campaign for. So I think it's really just a study of what really works well for Angelenos, how it's going to play out in Los Angeles. It may not look like any other jurisdiction because we're such a diverse and different area. But I think that the crux of the matter is that we want to ensure fundamentally, and I think this is where we all agree, is that we want to ensure that there's greater representation for folks who are living in the city of Los Angeles. And I'll caveat that by a personal experience. And I will say there was a point in time when I was a member and I lived in South Los Angeles, and it was an unincorporated part of the county. And this unincorporated part of the county means I'm not a part of the city of LA. And that means we lived in South LA, but we're one of 2 million. So we were one family of 2 million people, and getting representation. And that's not the case of what we're saying whatsoever on the LA City Council, but to have to live that experience and to have so many people that our supervisor was responsible for representing is just challenging to live under. And it's challenging even for this supervisor. And so having lived that and having brought that forward, I really want to see a place where folks who live in those situations, just like we were, have the representation that they need on the ground.
Very helpful. A last thing before we move on to getting back to our co-chairs, the LAUSD seems to have not gotten a lot of attention in this process, even though historically, as Gary pointed out, it's been in the charter forever. It's the city governs the governance of the LAUSD. All right, it's a little odd, but it is what it is, and it continues. what do you think about the recommendations to expand the school board and largely treat the school board in a similar fashion with redistricting and ethics in the charter? What is your feeling, Aaron, about that?
So RLA has taken on the LASD components of this as well. We did not come up with a recommendation to expand the school board. That's not to say that we're opposed to it, but it's not something that we directly took on. I think what we want to see is mirroring much of what's happening with conversations around council and IRC. How are we putting residents, parents, folks that have experience with the school system across Los Angeles into greater position of authority in determining what happens and what the future looks like? So mirroring some of the successes we've seen with the city, IRC, the recommendations that are coming forward around there impacting the school board, and then bringing those Angelitos into a conversation about how to ensure the size reflects their experience, as well as their ability to have a voice in what happens in the future of their and their children's education.
Russia, what's your thought about the LAUSD in this process?
Yeah, our office didn't do any detailed analysis for the LAUSD, but on principle, we think that anything that's done for the city of LA in terms of establishing an independent redistricting commission for the city also be something unparalleled that you do for LAUSD. We think that it should be independent, that the community should have the ability to voice how they like to see their education system roll out, the impacts that it would have on them, how it's impacting them currently and them and their families, and so that they can participate in a truly transparent process as well.
Thanks. Fernando Guerra, are you on the call? I'm just going to wait a minute to see if Fernando is actually on the call. Professor Guerra really was the lead researcher for us on the LAUS.
Hey, Rafe, I am on the call, but I am literally boarding a flight right now. So unfortunately,
Go board on your flight. I was just trying to give you credit for your work. But anyway, enjoy your flight. Be safe. I am going to turn this back now to our co-chairs and to sort of take us home at this point. And Aaron and Russia, if you don't mind staying on, keep your cameras on. And thank you both. And I really do think there is a great chance for us all to get in a room together and talk through this and really sort of see what can be done to keep this reform momentum going through June. But for that, I'm going to turn it back to our co-chairs and thank you both for your partnership with us.
Thank you, Rafe, and thank you to our partners at RLA and Common Cause who have done a massively wonderful job. Before we move on to any of the questions that have been submitted, I'd like the opportunity for the remaining panel members to share their thoughts. And both of the other two members of the panel, Sarah Sadwani and Boris Ricks, are here and played pivotal roles on specific areas that were of pivotal interest to them. And so, Boris, I'll call on you first if there's any additional detail you'd like to share or to talk a little bit about the community outreach approach and how this process might affect various communities in Los Angeles. And then we'll come to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Gary, and welcome everyone. I just want to say this from my experiences with focus groups and on the ground participation in South Los Angeles, particularly in getting the pulse of the African American community. There's a couple of things that really stand out. Number one, the African American community has, of course, occupied 3 out of these 15 council seats for quite some time, since 1961, and as a result, have coalesced power in 3 districts, the 8th, 9th, and 10th. At present, if in fact there is council expansion, those districts, of course, are likely to be redrawn, i.e. broken up. And this, in some regards, the African American community sees it as African Americans probably not being able to occupy or maintain those 3 seats. So you actually end up losing power. And so that has some African American residents on the fence about the process. It's basically, you know, why would we support something that gives us less representation, and particularly with the history in the U.S. and cities and states alike. So as a result, there's some apprehension, and it may in fact be well placed, but apprehension nevertheless. However, that apprehension is compared and contrasted against, again, a city of 4 million people, 15 council districts, which are about 270,000 people per district, African Americans representing about 9% of the city and occupying 3 seats. That's about 20%. That's about 20%, you know, 3 out of 15. So there's a major major challenge here. Does the African American community partner with other groups in some sort of coalition model to move forward to ensure that there's representation? Although these districts have been primarily held by African Americans, these districts are plurality districts when you talk about race, ethnicity. African Americans and Latinos and other people of color live side by side, and these neighborhoods have created a sense of community that, you know, can only be uniquely Los Angeles. Los Angeles is probably the only place that you can have tamales and collard greens for Christmas, an African American delicacy and the Latino delicacy. And so this is, you know, a unique, I'm gonna stick with my food analogies. This is a unique jambalaya we have here in Los Angeles, a jambalaya of leadership, and it is working. I'm not sure it works anyplace else. It works in Los Angeles. Again, we're one of the few cities that have elected an African American mayor, a Latino mayor, a liberal white mayor, and then a Black woman as mayor. So, you know, we're open to some suggestions as to how to move forward to ensure the interests of folk from South Los Angeles and other areas is represented and represented well. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Boris. Sarah Sadwani from Pomona College benefited the committee in 2 really important ways. One was a deep interest in the issue of ethics reform, and the other was having served as a statewide redistricting commissioner. She had seen the mechanics from the inside. So Sarah, I would love to hear your thoughts on the presentation and our proposals.
Yeah, of course. And thank you to all of you. And it's been an incredible process this last year. And I truly echo so much of everything that has already been said. Of course, it's been an incredibly collaborative process. I'm very thankful to have had an opportunity to be a part of it. You know, there was a time when independent redistricting was a far-fetched idea. People were very skeptical of it and did not want to see it move forward. The biggest fear was, in fact, that it would not only, of course, minimize the power of legislators, but also potentially have negative impacts for communities of color. Many civil rights groups back in 2008 stood against the proposal for independent redistricting commission. And I think the work at the state level, I'd like to include the work that our commission did, but of course the work of the 2010 commission, as well as the commissions that have formed in counties and cities across the state, have shown that there is a path forward for fair redistricting. I'm really proud of the work that we did here to take the model of the California's State Redistricting Commission, which is largely seen as the gold standard across the nation. And we've adapted it in some unique ways to make it suit the uniqueness of Los Angeles that Boris was talking about, the vast diversity that we see here in LA. However, that's not enough. There are so many issues here in Los Angeles, and that was very clear and apparent from both the polling and the focus groups that we conducted. Trust in government is incredibly low. And we need to do all that we can to secure that. Some of the reforms that we have suggested are scary, quite frankly, to folks because they haven't seen them before. They don't know how they would work necessarily. But we've been in such a place before. And by putting our trust in the people of the state of California, and in this instance, in the people of the city of Los Angeles, some pretty incredible things could come out of it. We have an incredibly engaged electorate and residents. And I think now is the time, I mean, just to uplift some of the pieces that Russia had mentioned. This is a political moment. There is a window that is open for change. And I think it's incredibly important that we seize it, not sit on our hands, afraid to embrace something that might be new and unknown, but instead take on something that could benefit all of us as Angelenos. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Boris and Sarah, for your contributions in general, but also for your comments just now. We do have a few minutes where we can pivot to the questions. Again, the Q&A box is open. There are several questions that have already been put in the chat. So I will just walk through them. And again, various members of our leadership team and/or Russia and Aaron, please do chime in. The first question is, has there been further discussion around capping salaries of council members? And so I'm just going to pivot briefly. Gary, do you want to take that one on? And then we will move to someone else on our leadership team for the next question.
Sure. We actually initially toyed with the idea of reducing expenditures on the existing council seats so as to hold the city's budget harmless. And then we changed our mind. And we changed our mind for two reasons. The first was that we didn't want to create hobbled council seats or council seats with less resources to interact with the community, when in fact the entire point was to make it easier for the community to reach their elected officials and have their voices heard. And the second is that democracy is worth the expenditure. Even under our proposal to go to 25 seats, the budget of the entire council and its offices and staff would rise to a whopping 0.5% of the city's budget. Democracy costs money, good governance costs money. This is very reasonable and very comparable with the rest of the country. And so we would cap overall expenditures, and we do it as a percentage because capping it as at a numerical figure, which would have to be changed repeatedly because of inflation and so forth, is just not a wise decision. So that was the approach we took, and I think it's the right one.
Thank you very much. Next question is, and I'm moving quickly just in the interest of time, does the council's recent approval of an IRC charter amendment change the governance reform work at all? And I'm going to pitch that to Sarah.
Thanks, Anjamarie. Of course, I think it's really exciting to see the council move forward with the IRC proposal, and we'll all have a chance to vote, hopefully, for an IRC in 2024. As we've laid out in this report, however, there is still more work to be done. So while that is an important first step, it is hopefully not the only step that the ad hoc committee will be taking. Certainly the committee continues to meet, and I hope that they'll continue to review the findings of this report and continue to work forward to advance them. Council expansion is very popular despite some of the prevailing wisdom that people wouldn't want it. We show that there's a strong support and a path forward to advance these kinds of reforms. So I am very hopeful that the City Council's Ad Hoc Governance Committee will continue to advance this work.
Thank you very much. Next question is for Rafe. As someone who has lots of experience on this, what is the timeline for charter reform projects, if any? And I'm assuming, of course, we don't control the timeline at all, but maybe you could speak to just in general how these kinds of things function.
Sure. First of all, there is time still to get things on the ballot in for the November 2024 election. We're talking really about May or June. There's a lot of things that have to happen. The city attorney has to prepare documents. There's a lot of stuff that has to be done. And as Aaron pointed out, there's a lot of details still to be resolved, but we're really not out of time. There's always been a feeling around town that we're in a rush, and if it's not done by next week, the window has closed. Now, the window will close at some point in the spring. Now, for a charter commission, it's a whole different timeline, because clearly that would kick things back. And as Aaron points out, there's plenty of other things that a charter commission could be doing beyond the additional 2 categories that we're talking about here. There's the vacancy question and the council, there's land use, there's a host of things, but you have to get a commission up and running. You have to figure out an appointment process. And then Russia pointed out some investigation of other models than we've used in LA for the recommendations of such a commission. You're probably talking about an 18-month, 12 to 18-month process, which would mean another election cycle. So it all depends whether you're talking about getting a 3-part proposal. It would be a rush, partly because the focus at City Hall has been so much on redistricting, and I think they've done a very good job on it. But Aaron pointed out that it's been mostly about that. So there's time, there's not unlimited time. Let's put it that way.
Thank you very much, Rafe. In terms of I think this might be our last question, but just in case, I will say our next question, Boris, does your proposal speak to full-time versus part-time council members with current salaries and staff levels?
We do propose that our council members are full-time. Governing a city the size of Los Angeles, over 4 million, close to 4 million people, is a full-time job. We need to meet the needs of the citizens in the city, ensuring that they have quality representation, that their needs are met, and that taxpayer dollars are spent in a way that and certainly enriches goods and the delivery of services to communities and residents. So in that respect, we need a full-time council. Again, we're the 2nd largest city in the US, and we certainly have enough residents to certainly require a full-time council. And for a representative democracy, I think that is, particularly in the case of Los Angeles, certainly first and foremost.
Thank you very much. I know we're not going to be able to get to all of the other questions because we're two minutes away from ending, but did want to just gesture towards a couple of them. In terms of the Ethics Commission, there's a question about the body being fully comprised of political appointees from elected officials. Why shouldn't we hedge against that? I think one of the ways that our committee and our group really landed on making sure that political appointees is not kind of an unlimited, unregulated kind of process is to actually say that those ethics commissioners need to go through the same kind of selection process. So even though the mayor's office or even though members of the city council are appointing folks, the vetting process is actually, there is a call, there is an application process. The eligibility requirements that we recommend in our larger report are the kinds of things that, again, what would apply to the IRCs for LAUSD and for city council, or for the city of Los Angeles, excuse me, would actually also apply for ethics commissioners. So we didn't go as far as some of the other cities, but we definitely did make steps in that direction. So we are at time. And so I would like to thank everyone for joining us. Again, please do feel free to reach out to any of the 6 of us with regard to questions that you might have. And we want to thank from the bottoms of our hearts all of the researchers, all of you for joining us, Aaron Robertson and Russia Chavez Cardenas. We want to absolutely thank you all for joining us, as well as the support of the philanthropic sector that we would not have been able to do this work without. So thank you very much. Happy holidays and have a great rest of your day.